Thanks to everybody for coming out tonight on Tuesday. It's really good to see you all and to celebrate this publication. It's taken us a little while to put it together. It's actually been a full year since the Sum of the Parts exhibition, which many of you were involved with, which was, one year today being Hiroshima Day, of course, 6th of August, which we all like to remember, and Ruth Coombes will be talking to us about that later on. So my name is Erin Forsyth, for those of you that don't know me. I've been working with the team here at the Depot, mainly with Linda and with Ruby, on the cultural mapping project, the Museum of the Vernacular, and this publication. Tonight we're also going to hear from Dennis Trussell, of course, the patron for the Cultural Icons series, there you are, which will be amazing, on the topic of the vernacular. Artist Nigel Brown, who has done the amazing cover and also this spectacular painting, which it's really nice to be around again. That was one of the really significant pieces in the exhibition last year, and it says so much about the vernacular that I can't explain. Which is, one of the great things about artwork, and one of the great things about this publication as well, is that it's, everyone's got their own way of expressing their ideas about things. So working in that format for this book has been really interesting. I just want to take a minute to thank all the contributors: Adele Salmanziba, Linda Blinko, Barry Brickle, Nigel Brown, Dean Buchanan, John Coots, Mia Hamilton, Luke Jacombe, Brendan Keto, Debbie Knowles, Sue Lorimer, Ruth McDowell, Helen Pollock, Marie Potter, Marie Scarlett, Richard von Sturmer, Alex Taylor, Dennis Trussell, Alice Tyler, Celia Walker, Tony Watkins, Ruby Watson, and Diane Zahn. It's been so amazing to work with each of you individually and to see it all come together in something like this, which really documents like a snapshot of ever-evolving culture, and also really important to thank Shelley Jacobson and Emily Giles for... Are you Emily? Hi, nice to meet you. Really great job on the all the proofing and the layout and stuff. Without you guys, it wouldn't have happened. So, yeah. It's a very, very special thank you to everyone that has been contributing, not just to the publication, but to the project as a whole. Because this is kind of like the visible part of something that's much wider that the Depot has been looking at for a while now, starting off with the Cultural Icons series, which hopefully most of you know about. So it's kind of an ongoing series of interviews with some of New Zealand's unsung heroes of the arts and culture scene. So that's got over 60 episodes now, and there's a lot of material and a lot of information there that would have otherwise not been documented. It's actually from that series that Linda and Lynn and the team here at the Depot recognised a real veracity in New Zealanders to explore their own cultural identity. And from that, the Cultural Mapping Project was born, and then the publication subsequently. And Sum of the Parts was probably the last time that we all got together to talk about it. And Margaret, you did such an amazing job up at the barracks, so and there's a lot of good work and good effort, like Ruth, the thing that Ruby's going to talk about as well. So I'm going to stop blabbering on and say just thanks. It's really good to be here. I'm really happy. Really great to see this. And in search of the vernacular, I'm still trying to find a succinct definition for the vernacular, but I'm sure Dennis has got some very good key things to talk about, so I'll pass it over to you.
I don't want us ever to define the vernacular. Very dangerous thing, definitions. But anyway, I will say something about it. First of all, though, I have to arrange the visuals, the optics. Mainly, I wish to launch the book, really, which I have only just seen in its final incarnation. I've read it, but I read a computer printout of it. And so I think it's a very handsome publication, and that we should all buy it. as an author, I'm very much in favour of people buying books. This singular publication is a chapbook of discussion, imagery, poems, ideas. It is open-ended, a little anarchic, because its search is open-ended. The vernacular is something we all once were and still are in many ways. It was the culture, the common culture of a group or individuals that was as the sea is to the fish that live in it. So everywhere, so all about us, that we're unconscious of it. It is our medium, our way. The fact that we are now in search of it tells us that this ancient idiomatic culture is something that we have partly lost, yet not lost. We can no more lose it than we can lose our blood. What has changed is that we have become conscious of much that was previously unspoken, taken for granted. We have lost our innocence and eaten of the fruits of many trees of knowledge, the fruits of art history, anthropology, archaeology, psychology, and others. We can still be spontaneous, but our spontaneity is of a different order. We're spontaneous now while carrying a complex cargo of concepts about ourselves and our culture. Yet the vernacular persists. It does not mean the parochial, because it is universal. The world is a map of vernacular sites. It does not mean nationalism or regionalism in any prescriptive or aggressive way. And though universal, it is the opposite of the transnational, a word much liked by people like our cabinet ministers. Transnationalism is about standardisation of life and artefacts, driven by a profit motive. But the vernacular is actually cosmopolitan in the best sense of that much abused word. A truly vernacular person finds the vernacular wherever they alight, whether it be Paris, Timbuktu or Devonport. Homo vernaculus, femina vernacular, is a practitioner in the art of travel as distinct from package tourism. The vernacular is intimately connected with identity. At times, they are virtually inseparable. An art such as that practiced by Barry Brickell in his epic ceramic journey uses ancient localised craft skills practiced in numberless vernacular villages, but projects itself in such a way as to tell us something about our identity, singular and plural, in this country. Identity is edgy and complex. It is about what makes me feel as me, but it depends on my entering into relations with others. To have identity is also to contend with the other identities, some internal, many external to ourselves. Much of our identity comes from the past, as well as our present here in Aotearoa New Zealand. That name alone, Aotearoa New Zealand, raises a host of identities. I tried to explore this question of identity in a long poem that I wrote called Speaking to the Islands of the Ancestors. I'll read you a very short excerpt from the introduction to this. What are the islands of the ancestors? Are they mythical or actual? Are they locations where grandparents and other close family were born and grew? Are they bodies, islands of symbolism and knowledge, or structures of artefact and technology? I found them in all these ways strongly present in the Northern Hemisphere. Some have obvious links with my biological family, others no such connection. In their total effect on me, they are what I've called an archaeology of the soul. An archaeology that is in part richly positive, in part inimical to the living of life far from the places that appear in the poems of this book. These poems are set mainly in the Northern Hemisphere. A tension exists here between the past and the present. Everyone in this country has roots leading back to ancestral places, whether the Hawaiki of Polynesia, or in my own case, what I have called the dense and complex I of our Hawaiki, London. Now, the reason I'm talking about ancestry and identity in relation to the vernacular is that on reading that book, it also does. When I lived in London, arriving there first at the age of 45, I had Aotearoa New Zealand constantly in mind. That was my personal past. Now, as I live back here, yet writing in English, playing music based on European concepts, I feel my European roots live and twitching. It's a dialogue. I'll read you a very short aspect of the dialogue, set in the moment that I thought of coming into London. I returned to a life in which I had never lived, speaking in English, the syntax of cash and contract, the forked market talk of sciences focused in matter, of verb shuttles that had woven the iron script of industry. I walked into the map of London, my speaking still framed by a life of iron-roofed houses, iron-roofed towns and weatherboard houses. Habitant of blue birth islands, the jagged greens of their forest ridges. Habitant of English, the wash of its poetry, breaking onto my coasts of music, Aotearoa, mountains sonorous under oceanic light, transfixed in Prospero's glance. And that's part of the duality in which certainly I've lived, and I'm sure many of us have. A tension exists here between past and present. Everyone in this country, London's worked stones, New Zealand's wild mountain rock, all mixed up in one person. Another short excerpt. I was a knowing of blood volcanoes, their lava mantles making purple islands of white sea burstings on iron-black coasts, of quake-split ridges, tenuous settlements. And you were to me, London, the revelation of a woman in greys, sensuous still in your old and inward calculus, soft in your fen mouth of Thames, yet having all the bone that endures under the wash of your sky. So there is not one side of the vernacular for us, but many. There is not one identity, but many. We're composite cultural beings. Yet each of us is formed around an inexplicable and personal core. It is that core which determines how we give style and singularity to our work. A final thought. It is Hiroshima Day, and things nuclear are on our minds. What has the vernacular to do with being nuclear free? We are launching In Search of the Vernacular on the same day as we are remembering the terrible unleashing of nuclear weapons on civilian populations in Japan. I believe the essential qualities of nuclear technology are radically non-vernacular. They involve the use of energy from particles that are tiny, invisible, and not yet aggregated into structures that have meaning in the macrocosm known to our senses. There are no fish, trees, stones, handmade artefacts, or clouds involved in nuclear fission. The particles of its microscopic world are of scientific and philosophical interest, but harnessed by the industries of nuclear power generation, food irradiation, and weapons systems, they become uniquely lethal. These systems are beyond vernacular or democratic control. They depend on secrecy and spin. As technologies, they are so abstract that they stand as metaphor for everything unlike the local, the serendipitous, the free. They symbolise a society so technicised and so robotic that human beings in it would be reduced to moral automatism. Our shield against this standardised nightmare is the vernacular, the wit of the commons, the idiosyncratic, expressive and constructive anarchy of our arts and crafts. To that end, I'd like this book to be dedicated, and I'm glad to declare it launched.
Well, vernacular, indefinable, and having been told for most of my years of practicing that I'm a New Zealand painter and, and very recognisable and all that sort of thing, I often forget what it is, or if I ever remembered. When I was young, I knew things for sure, like I knew that I had a fern garden, and that was somehow under these little pungas and things. There was something that was intrinsically of my country. But when I went to Melbourne and I saw pungas everywhere, or another version, I thought, oh God, and even the Kiwi, which I use quite a bit. The most inspirational Kiwi for me was a kind of concrete one that was above a factory in Auckland. So, and when I see the real one, I think it's marvellous, but I still prefer the concrete one. So, I was brought up in orchards, and in orchards we used to make big sort of fruit. It was a habit of, particularly in the Bay of Plenty, you'd make a big grapefruit or treat tomato, we used to call them in those days, Tamarillo, and put it out the gate with this handwritten sign saying, fruit for sale, honesty box. Honesty box, yeah, that's an interesting thing, because we're in a complex, dishonest society now, I think. So that vernacular to me has it has some traces of honesty, but also brutality. I don't want to go back to the 6 o'clock swill or the number 8 wire mentality, even though I live on a little lifestyle property. I value number 8 wire. But how do you compare number 8 wire to a cell phone? It's just a huge gap, It's just, there's a huge gap. And so you get all your different designers in New Zealand saying, we've got, if we're going to be world competitive, we don't want to be in that number 8 wire mentality. So that's and you'd never go into a polytech or a university and say, I'm teaching number 8 mentality. And I want our politics to go back to that. But nevertheless, there was some plain speaking in the past, which perhaps gets lost in the complexity of now, because it's we've always had all these invasions here. Today I was looking at the Auckland Museum and I was thinking, that's your Greek temple that, you think, oh, there's the Greek temple with all Aotearoa, and then I was looking at all the high rise of Auckland and thinking, that relates to the Greek temple. Why do they relate? Because they do relate, because it's all kind of linear, straight, you know, compartmentalised, and we're, you know, we're mainly water, and we're carrying around intestines inside and all this sort of thing. We're you know, we've all become living in this world that grew out of functionalism and modernism, which is becoming very tired. I mean, when I was young, you know, under the, you know, tutorship of McCann and that, you know, Merkowitz and all those people, modernism seemed so vital, and it was, you know, it was the best thing you could do. Now it's, you know, it's all uncertain. The technology is still going on, but for artists, it's, you know, do we become more wired up and robotic as Dennis talks? You know, what do we become? And the answer is you can make all these choices and you can pick out what you want to be, and you can reject a lot of the technological in parts of your life. You know, it's very invasive, but you have that choice. So that's a bit about the vernacular, and I hope I've totally confused you, because that was my aim. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nigel and Dennis, for that. And thank you all of you for coming this evening and supporting the publication In Search of the Vernacular. It's really exciting to finally have it in our hot little hands after the last year's efforts since the Sum of the Parts. That was, today, a year ago, was the Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemoration, which Ruth helped organise, so it's pretty exciting to see it sort of come full circle. A year ago I was fortunate enough to be a part of the Depot team helping bring to life the Sum of the Part exhibition, which brought together musicians, artists, peace advocates, poets and members of the extended Devonport community into the three-part show. Two of these parts were totally dedicated to peace. There was the peace paintings, prints and poets curated by Margaret here at the Moanga Ika barracks, and that was just an incredible collaboration of fantastic artists and poets, and it was a really special sort of moment. So thank you, Margaret. And also we had Peace is Not Merely the Absence of War up at the Museum of the Vernacular. This significant representation that the peace theme had in some of the parts is translated into this publication, In Search of the Vernacular. And I'm sure that this is an indication of how relevant the idea of peace is to our cultural identity. Peace is ingrained in our search for the vernacular. I would like to thank each and every contributor to the publication and to the publication and to the Sum of the Parts. In particular, Nigel Brown, Barry Brickle and Dennis Trussell. So your encouragement and enthusiasm has provided momentum for this whole project from start to finish, but it's probably not finished yet. I just saw the sign, it said first edition, limited number, so I'm worried about second edition. I love receiving the handwritten philosophical scrawls and envelopes covered in sketches from Nigel, and Barry and Dennis's retaliation bashed out on their old typewriters, and some of them are published in this In Search for the Vernacular. I also really want to thank Erin, Linda, Emily and Shelley for all the work that you've put into this, because I couldn't have done it without you, that's for sure. It'd be a little scrap of paper that we'd all take home. So, and finally, I want to introduce Ruth Coombes, who's a very inspirational woman, and she's going to share her heart and passion for nuclear-free New Zealand tonight and celebrate Nagasaki and Hiroshima commemoration. Thank you.
Most of you would know that today represents another step on the distance from those terrible weapons that were unleashed in 1945 on the 6th of August on Hiroshima and the 9th of August on Nagasaki, mainly on civilian population. And I'd just like to read some words from, they were noted by Robert Oppenheimer, who was considered the father of the nuclear bomb. He was the American who led the program that developed the weapon. From the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burn into the sky, that would be like the splendour of the Mighty One. I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. And I think really those words are extraordinarily emotional, really, because that's what's happening, and the result of nuclear weapons and the testing and the use of nuclear power is evident now in the world. Like Fukushima now has even more disaster happening. It looks as though the Pacific is going to be completely polluted from leakage that they've discovered, and that clearly they can't contain. Nobody could contain it. It's done. The other issue is veterans' health. Veterans who observed the British test, and also our own veterans who were sent by the government to protest that in Aotearoa. People weren't really aware, although they should have been, of the devastating consequences that echo down through the generations. It's not just the people that were exposed, it's their children and their children's children. And that will be evident in Japan, I'm sure, in the next few years, and probably in other parts of the world who are unfortunate enough to have some of that fallout. I belong to a Women's International League for Peace and Freedom that was formed in 1915 by women meeting in the middle of the First World War and determined to try and find a way to prevent that terrible devastation happening again, and constantly trying to draw attention to the issues. And every year WILPF puts out a statement on Hiroshima Day, and there are some very good sites if you're interested in further information. But there's good and bad. And I'd just like you to read a little bit from one of their statements. Of all the states that currently possess nuclear weapons, have plans to modernise these weapons in the coming decades. The Obama administration, for example, has committed to spend $185 billion over the next 20 years to modernise the US nuclear arsenal and delivery systems, at the same time as advocating for the removal of nuclear weapons. So on the one hand, they're advocating to spend all this unbelievable money. I mean, I just can't imagine all those zeros. And on the other hand, there was a conference in June where, in Sweden, where they're looking at trying to prevent the high north, they call it, which is the northern, near the North Pole, that area. There was an international conference on the North and international security in Sweden, and they agreed to a statement expressing concern that it's being used by an expanding NATO practice ground in which to rehearse future warfighting strategies and to test and develop new technologies. But at least, you know, on the one hand, there's some pretty awful things going on. On the other hand, people don't stop. I mean, I think if you give up and you say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, and I think that just leads to absolute disaster. We have to, even in a small way, continue to advocate for peaceful ways of living in our world and to do something about these weapons. And I think talking about the vernacular, nuclear free and New Zealand go together. New Zealand is nuclear free, and Devonport was the first nuclear free zone in New Zealand. And I think it's part of our history and part of our identity that we are nuclear free. And people all around the world know New Zealand for rugby, sheep, milk powder, and being nuclear free. It's really interesting. People that, you know, you just don't expect would even have heard of New Zealand. So I think it is part of our identity and part of the vernacular that characterises New Zealanders. And WILPF is holding its annual Hiroshima Nagasaki commemoration at the Winter Gardens on Sunday, next Sunday, from 5:30. So you're most welcome to join us for there'll be speakers, music and candle lighting, and it's nice and warm because it's in the one of the lovely warm greenhouses, the tropical greenhouse. So there's some flowers there. I'd also like to they link you to the display there. It's Operation Grapple. Is it Operation Grapple, Linda? Was that Operation Grapple? Yeah. Those are the the veterans who went to observe the British tests, and also there's cranes, 1,000 cranes that are made to represent Hiroshima, or the peace movement in Hiroshima and throughout the world, in the other little room. So thank you very much, and please do come.
So that's all the talking over. Maybe it's time to do some reading. So the book's there. There's quite a lot to look at, and big thanks to Linda especially. Just wanted to point out like how amazing you are, and the way that you're driving this project and kind of bringing people together is really, really important. And you're a champion. So thanks.